Welcome back to a new episode of AI or DIY. By now you've probably figured out that the title is a trick question because all of my videos are DIY. This time we're going to remake these AI planets that melt like butter. This is the perfect opportunity to try clay cracking again. In a previous video, I failed at making AI beads using clay because they were just too small. However, I still think this method has a lot of potential, and these planets are much bigger and easier to make. First of all, I want to create some test shots. Clay cracking involves covering paper clay with a layer of clear nail polish to create satisfying ASMR sound effects. The process is very time sensitive, so leaving your pieces for too long or too short can ruin the final result. The other important thing is the spreadability of the clay. My biggest worry is that the clay will start to dry out and it won't produce a satisfactory spreading effect. I want to test out a few ideas on how to increase the level of moisture inside the final piece. For one of the pieces, I'm making a bowl shape and filling it up with hair gel. I'm hoping this will keep the inside soft and let the knife slide around more easily. And for the other one, I'm going to inject the inside with water just before breaking it apart. This was a bit harder than expected because the clay didn't seem to absorb the liquid very easily. A lot of it came back out, but I managed to get about a third of the syringe inside. I bought a new cutting board for these videos as well. This one has a glossy, deep brown surface without me having to add water or oil on top. I'm going to place my clay cracking balls on here and see which one spreads the best. The first one is normal clay that's been left for 24 hours. This one feels a bit too dry and it doesn't really stick to the bread. This is partly caused by the nail polish shell, so I also need to find a balance between having a shiny surface and not letting the polish seal the clay inside. Next comes the clay ball filled with water. This does feel softer than the first one, but it's still not quite there. I don't like how the ball slides around a bit for the first few seconds, which spoils the satisfaction of the spreading. Now comes the one filled with hair gel. Most of the gel squished out the side when I pressed it, but it still provides enough moisture to keep the clay on the toast. This is what I'm looking for because it melts and sticks to the bread exactly like those AI planets. So now it's time to make the real ones. I'm mixing 2 shades of cheap paper clay together to make a ball about the size of a small apple. Then I'm making a bowl shape and filling this up with hair gel. Since the inner volume is much larger than the test pieces, the hair gel should be even more effective at keeping the clay soft and spreadable. I'm closing up the opening carefully and smoothing everything out. These plastic ornament balls are pretty useful for storing the planets while they dry. Now I'm going to steal a trick from generative AI, which is to make duplicates. I want to have as many versions of the same thing as possible so I can pick out the best one. I also realized that marbling different colors of clay together is the perfect method for creating planetary patterns. Just blending blue and white produces a shockingly realistic background for Earth's atmosphere. Now I'm mixing green, blue and white together to create the icy giant Uranus. Just like before, I'm pressing this into a bowl shape and filling it generously with hair gel. This time, I also want to try adding glitter. I like the idea of the texture and visuals changing while the knife is spreading out the clay. If done correctly, this would make it look more like AI, but if done poorly, it would immediately give away the fact it's a sloppy handmade object. For this reason, I'm going with an iridescent triangular glitter that doesn't look as cheap or recognizable as craft glitter. For the final planet, I'm going to make Saturn because of its striking rings. Unfortunately, I can't make any duplicates here because I don't have enough yellow or brown clay. I already have to improvise a bit by making this one darker with acrylic paint. Then I'm marbling a bit of white and yellow inside to create the surface design. I'm going to fill this with a golden tinsel-like glitter and then closing it up and rolling it back into a ball. So here are all the planets, and I'm really pleased with how they turned out. The clay marbling has produced an effect that's much more realistic than I could ever paint. However, I do have to paint on all the continents, and that's going to be the next step. I'm going to use watercolor for this because the pigment can be pressed apart easily even after it's dry. Acrylic paint dries in a solid plastic-like layer which will disrupt the aesthetics. I made a Bob Ross slime video many years ago using the same principle. If I want the final surface to break apart nicely, then I always use watercolor or gouache. The ones in tubes have virtually the same opacity as acrylics. Painting a globe is a bit harder than it looks. The main problem is spacing out all the continents so it's recognizable as Earth from every angle. At some point, I always end up with a few weird geographies, like an ocean being too small or two countries near each other that's not supposed to be there. After laying down the base, I'm going in with white for the desert and icy areas. Then I'm adding some details in different shades of green and enhancing the edges of the map with dark brown. So a really interesting fact is that this is one of the very few examples where imperfection is proof that this has been made by a human. Usually when you think of AI art, you associate it with weird mistakes and visual inconsistencies. However, if you ask AI to generate a globe, then it's going to do it perfectly because it's simply taking a real-world map and then slapping that onto a spherical ball. In contrast, it's virtually impossible for a human to paint a perfectly accurate map onto a globe because I don't want to sit here for hours. I'm just aiming for a balance between a recognizable amount of detail within a reasonable time frame. So the result are these three globes which look great from afar, but you can obviously see inaccuracies up close. Once the paint has dried, I'm covering all of these with one layer of clear nail polish. In my test pieces, I used 2 layers, and I felt that made the final exterior a bit too smooth. The priority here is that they need to look shiny but melt like butter, so the nail polish is just there to give it a glossy reflection. I don't actually need any ASMR cracking noises for this project. At this point, I also realized that the hair gel inside the planets is starting to distort the shape. You can't really see it on camera, but the gel was actually dragging the clay downwards. My biggest fear is that the hair gel might end up spilling out of the ball, which will completely ruin the shape and all the work that went into making that piece. I felt it was too risky to leave the pieces alone even for an hour, so I took them home with me while they were drying. I had them inside these plastic balls, which was pretty convenient, and then rolled them in my hands every 10 minutes to make sure the hair gel didn't settle too far on one side. So this is 4 hours after applying the nail polish. I don't want to wait 24 hours this time because I feel the clay might dry too much and there's a big risk of the hair gel coming out. The last step is to make the ring for Saturn. My initial idea is just to use paper because I want something very thin which won't disrupt the spreading part. I'm drawing 2 circles with a compass and then cutting them out. However, after trying it on, I don't like this effect at all. It looks quite cheap and really obviously like a paper ring. I feel the rings need more transparency, so I found this translucent plastic sheet from the cover of a folder. I'm repeating all the steps and making a ring that fits exactly over the planet without the need for glue or tape. Now this one looks a lot better. If I squint a bit, this could actually be a 3D modeled object and would look even more convincing with the right lighting and camera. And finally, it's time to set up the final shots. I'm really pleasantly surprised at how realistic these look. Even though I'm not specifically making a clay cracking piece, the ball still makes a hugely satisfying noise when pressed down with the knife. The other important detail is that the clay doesn't roll around on the bread. The hair gel is barely noticeable, and I don't think many people would even realize it's in there unless they've watched this video. However, it makes a big difference to the consistency of the clay. For the ASMR part, I decided to get a new microphone just for recording sound effects. This is the Blue Yeti, which is one of the best mics for picking up ASMR. In a previous video, I discovered that crushing toasted bread with my hands produces better noises than scraping it with a knife. So I'm using that same method here. I'm simply synchronizing the clip with my own recording and then doing some minor edits afterwards. The glitter ended up not being very noticeable, but I felt it helped to improve the grip of the hair gel. This one was quite a bit easier to spread than the others. Saturn was better than I expected, since I wasn't sure how the plastic ring would affect the motion, but it doesn't seem to be very intrusive. The ring kind of disappears under the rest of the clay, and this one looks very satisfying, despite the fact that I was only able to make one version. I also made a few diamond toast variants that went viral on TikTok and Instagram. I was quite surprised at how many people still thought this was AI. The biggest giveaway is actually the fact that there's a hand holding the bread. In the vast majority of AI toast videos, the knife spreads the object around without anything holding the bread in place. This is literally impossible in real life because it requires so much pressure that it will send the toast flying if you didn't hold it. I actually had sore spots on my fingers the next day because I was pressing down so hard with the knife. So this is a tiny detail you can look out for when trying to spot more impossible physics in Gen AI. I hope you enjoyed this video and be sure to subscribe for more. I feel like I'm gaining more and more experience making these, so I have so many new ideas to try out. I'm Joanna, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!